Hi everybody, it's Julia, your trusted travel expert, helping you find that je ne sais quoi wherever you are in the world. And this week I wanted to talk about a very special little corner of the world that I simply love. And luckily I have some clients that are looking at it, so that's why it's top of mind. And I wanted to tell you a little primer on the fabulous destination of Australia, also known as the Land of Oz, the Land Down Under. You know, it's got all kinds of fun names, and it's, got really famous back in the 80s with the Crocodile Dundee movies, and everyone realized how crazy and fun and different it is. And so there are a couple things that you need to know, obviously, about visiting Australia. Partly, number one, because it really is on the other side of the world. It really does take a really long time to get to, and you cross the international date line, which is a little bit funky, so you leave on one day and you arrive 2 days later, and then when you come back, you basically arrive almost the same time as you left, even though you flew 20 hours. It's a little crazy, and it does take a long time to get there. And I will say this really quick, even though New Zealand is right next to Australia, they really have nothing to do with each other at all, nothing culturally similar. New Zealand is really much more like Tahiti, ironically. It's much more of a Polynesian island, and it has nothing to do with Australia. And so even though they are kind of right next to each other, in my opinion, they're two different trips. Because Australia is so diverse and amazing and has so much to see itself. New Zealand is also amazing and has so much to see. And so, in my opinion, you're going to cram too much into one trip and it's going to be exhausting. So in my opinion, you should just pick one and do two different trips, or just pick one. The other thing to know about Australia, not only is it far away and a long time to get around to that corner of the world, but it's actually really, really big. I think because it's an island, people don't really think about how freaking massive it is, but it's basically, it's not quite that size, but it's basically similar to the contiguous United States. I mean, you can't really drive from city to city. You can road trip, but that takes forever. I mean, you have to fly everywhere. It's just a massive, massive country, and the vast majority of it is unpopulated. So kind of like Canada, everybody lives along the border. In Australia, everyone pretty much lives along the coast, for the most part. So then if you decide to go to Australia and you decide to fly all that way and go to that corner of the world, knowing that it's so large, you definitely want to have enough time to go and spend there. This is not really a place that you want to go for a week. 2 weeks is fine. 3 weeks is better, because there's so many fun and interesting places to see and do. So if you have 3 weeks or even more, then Australia, you will be able to do Australia and really get a sense of it. Because otherwise you're just going to spend so much of your time actually flying from place to place and hardly get to kind of like breathe and see some of this really interesting and crazy funky nature and learn about the Aboriginal culture and all that good stuff. So you want to give it some time. Now, where to go in Australia? Sydney, obviously, is the really famous capital with the famous Opera House and the beautiful bridge. And Sydney is an amazing capital city, and it definitely needs a couple of days. They have a wonderful zoo. They have wonderful beaches. It's a beautiful city. Melbourne is sort of the second city of Australia, and it's also an amazing city. They have, obviously they have the tennis, the Australian Open there every winter for us, January. And it's a really culinary focused city. It has amazing day trips right out of it. So does Sydney. Melbourne is where you would go and see the Great Ocean Road, which is the road with what they call the 12 Apostles. It's like 12 kind of cliffs kind of out in the ocean. It's really famous. You can see wild koala and kangaroo down there. Another day trip out of Melbourne is Phillips Island, which is where you can see the penguins. So that's really neat and interesting. On the Sydney side, day trips out of there can range from the very spiritual and beautiful blue mountains. They're spiritual for the Aboriginals. It's got this rock formation called the Three Sisters. It's really pretty, and it's also just a very lush, beautiful mountain setting, and there's a cute town near there. Another day trip out of Sydney is to a smaller, more minor wine region of Australia, which is called the Hunter Valley. The better wine region is actually out of sort of what is the third city of Australia, but I wouldn't say it's the third number one place you should go in Australia. That's Adelaide. Adelaide is supposed to be a wonderful city. I actually haven't been there, but it is another city. It's the wine region north of that is the Barossa Valley. And so if you're really into wine, definitely go to Adelaide and go to the Barossa Valley. But if you're trying to squeeze in Australia in 3 weeks, there are two other places that you should probably go to before you go out to Adelaide. And that is one of the premier attractions on Earth is the Great Barrier Reef. And that is actually a reef off the upper right east coast of Australia is a reef. And it's, it's unheard of. I mean, it's huge, it's massive, it is, having problems, but there are lots of different places you can go and visit and see the reef, whether you're a diver or just want to snorkel, or just want to see pretty beaches. On the south end of the reef, you have the Whitsunday Islands, and like Hamilton Island is an airport you could fly into, and there's some beautiful resorts on Hamilton Island. You can do live aboard sailing trips or boating trips. Whitehaven Beach, which is that crazy beautiful swirly blue and white beach, it's unreal. That's in the Whitsunday Islands. Further north along the reef, and the main part of the reef, the main tourist city along the Great Barrier Reef in Queensland is Cairns, and that's Cairns, but that's not said. You don't say Cairns, it's Cairns. And Cairns is sort of a workaday city. That's like where all the dive boats, live aboard boats leave from. So there was a lot of like workers that live there. It was not like particularly a charming city. It's a big backpacker city. There is a cool waterfront and fun bars and all that kind of good stuff with Cairns. And if you are wanting to do a couple of nights out on the reef to really get to the untouched parts and do some really amazing diving, then Cairns would probably be your home base to leave from. But if you were looking more for resorts, just a little bit further north of Cairns is a town called Port Douglas, and that's a really much more like pleasant resort town, and it also is closer to the next amazing natural phenomenon up in Queensland, and that's the Daintree rainforest, which I think is definitely worth seeing if you're up there. It's one of the only places on Earth where a rainforest meets a coral reef. There at the tip, you can go out on the beach and there's rainforest right up to the beach, and you can see the reef even like poking out of the waves and stuff on the beach. And there's really beautiful, streams, and I mean, it's crazy rainforest with crazy animals and plants and spiders and stuff you've never seen. So you definitely would want to spend a couple of days up in Queensland in some shape or form to see that kind of area. The next really big area that most people, are dying to see, it's on their bucket list, is Uluru, which is Ayers Rock. Uluru is the Aboriginal word, and that's, I think, kind of what people are calling this area, but that's sort of the red center, the outback, and that you have to fly in to Alice Springs and spend a couple days. I mean, I just had a friend that did really kind of just an overnight at Ayers Rock, Uluru, but in my opinion, there's a couple other things you could see. Minimum 2-3 days, in my opinion. 2 nights, 3 days. Uluru is extremely special and sacred to the Aboriginal people. It's beautiful. The sun sets, it changes colors. There's hiking to do. There's other interesting natural geological phenomenon around that area. And that, for some people, is very much what Australia is about, is that red center. But that's not even it. So, like what I just described, you'd be rushing if you did all of that in 3 weeks. I didn't get to Ayers Rock, and I was in Australia for about 3 weeks. And that's not even it. I mean, the capital city, Canberra, some people really like it. It's a planned city. The west of Australia is apparently amazing. Perth and the Kimberley, and there's a region down there, Margaret Valley, I think. It's just supposed to be spectacular. There's a train trip that takes 3 or 4 days that goes from Adelaide to Perth. That to me sounds fascinating, because you're basically you get it takes 3 days and there's nothing. There's Tasmania, the island just kind of broken off of the bottom of Australia, which is supposed to be super interesting. Really beautiful beaches, really interesting wildlife. Again, always interesting wildlife in Australia. And the Gold Coast, which I didn't even mention. That's sort of between Sydney and the Great Barrier Reef, is all the beach towns. Brisbane is the big city there. It's apparently a bit like Florida for us. So Australia has just a wealth of amazing places to go and see, and I would love to help plan your trip there. So if I have tempted you in any way, let me know, and we'll plan a fabulous trip down under. That's it for this week, and I'll talk to you next week. Bye-bye.